The radio crackled with static, then silence. Somewhere over the dark waters of the Philippine Sea, a single engine sputtered, coughed, and died. The cockpit went eerily quiet except for the wind screaming past the canopy. Lieutenant James Doolittle Jr., no relation to the famous general, though he bore the name with pride, had exactly 90 seconds before his P-38 Lightning would become his coffin, plunging into the black ocean below. His hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, but his mind raced faster. The intelligence photographs strapped to his chest could change everything. They had to make it home. He had to make it home. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will leave you speechless. It was November 1944, and the Pacific War had reached a critical turning point. American forces were island-hopping toward Japan, each battle bringing them closer to the enemy's homeland. But intelligence remained the most precious commodity in this vast theater of war. Every photograph, every intercepted message, every piece of reconnaissance could mean the difference between victory and massacre. The men who gathered this intelligence didn't fight with rifles or artillery. They fought with cameras and courage, flying deep into enemy territory where a single bullet could end everything. Jimmy Doolittle Jr. wasn't supposed to be a pilot. He'd grown up in Oregon, the son of a timber foreman, with hands meant for honest work and a mind sharp enough for engineering school. But when Pearl Harbor burned on that December morning in 1941, Jimmy walked away from his college acceptance letter and straight into a Navy recruiting office. By 1943, he'd earned his wings. By 1944, he was flying reconnaissance missions that took him farther behind enemy lines than most bomber crews ever ventured. The mission that November day had seemed routine, at least by the impossible standards of Pacific warfare. Intelligence had detected unusual activity at a Japanese airfield on Mindanao, the southernmost major island in the Philippines. General MacArthur's forces were preparing for the liberation of the Philippines, and every Japanese aircraft, every fortification, every troop movement mattered. Someone had to photograph that airfield. Someone had to count those planes. Jimmy volunteered before anyone else could speak. He'd taken off at dawn from Tacloban airstrip on Leyte, where American forces had established a precarious foothold just weeks earlier. The P-38 Lightning was perfect for reconnaissance work, fast, long-ranged, and equipped with cameras mounted in the nose. Its twin-boom design made it instantly recognizable, which was both blessing and curse. American pilots loved it. Japanese fighter pilots hunted it relentlessly. The flight to Mindanao took him over water so blue it hurt to look at, over islands where Japanese soldiers still fought with desperate ferocity, over jungles that had swallowed entire battalions without trace. Jimmy flew at 28,000 feet, high enough that his contrail rode a white line across the morning sky, high enough that the cold bit through his flight suit and turned his breath to fog inside the oxygen mask. He reached the target at 0947 hours. The airfield sprawled below him like a model, runways carved into red earth, revetments sheltering fighters, barracks arranged in neat rows. Jimmy pushed the P-38 into a shallow dive, cameras whirring, capturing every detail. He counted 57 aircraft on the ground, 57 planes that could tear apart MacArthur's landing forces if they weren't destroyed first. That's when the anti-aircraft fire started. Black puffs of flak erupted around him, each explosion a fist of hot metal fragments that could shred aluminum and flesh with equal efficiency. Jimmy threw the P-38 into a hard banking turn, cameras still running, determined to complete his sweep. One more pass, just one more pass to capture the northern revetments. The shell that found him wasn't the largest. It was almost gentle, really, a fragment no bigger than a postage stamp that punched through the left engine cowling and severed a fuel line. The engine didn't explode, it simply stopped, trailing white smoke that turned black as aviation fuel ignited. Jimmy shut down the dying engine, feathered the propeller, and pushed the throttle forward on the remaining engine. The P-38 could fly on one engine, but not well, and certainly not with battle damage. He pointed the nose east, toward the sea, toward home, calculating distances and fuel consumption with the cold precision fear demands. He almost made it. 60 miles from Leyte, with the Philippine coast visible on the horizon, the second engine began to fail. Not battle damage this time, just the brutal mathematics of flying too hard, too long, on one engine while the other leaked fuel that the remaining engine couldn't access. The temperature gauge climbed into the red. The oil pressure dropped. Jimmy knew these symptoms. He had maybe 5 minutes before this engine seized completely. Would you have made the same choice? He could have bailed out right there. The parachute would have brought him down safely into the ocean, where he might survive long enough for rescue. The Navy had patrol boats, Catalina flying boats that searched for downed pilots. He might make it. But the intelligence photographs wouldn't. They'd sink with the plane, gone forever, and those 57 Japanese aircraft would still be waiting when American forces came ashore. Jimmy made his decision in the time it takes a heart to beat 3 times. He was going to ride this plane down, and he was going to do it as close to friendly territory as physics and luck would allow. The engine died at 11:47 hours. The sudden silence was profound. No roar of engines, no whistle of wind through battle damage, just the whisper of air across wings as the P-38 became a glider, trading altitude for distance at a rate that would have made his flight instructors weep. Jimmy had the stick in a death grip, maintaining perfect attitude, squeezing every possible foot of glide out of the wounded aircraft. The Philippine coastline grew closer. He could see the beaches now, the jungle beyond, the smoke from American campfires. So close. 10 miles, 8 miles, 5 miles. The ocean came up to meet him at 200 miles per hour. Jimmy did everything right. He'd positioned the aircraft perfectly, nose slightly up, wings level, speed as slow as he dared without stalling. The P-38 hit the water tail first, just as the manual prescribed. The tail section sheared off instantly. The nose pitched down, scooping water. The cockpit flooded in seconds. Rescue crews found debris 40 minutes later, fragments of wing, a section of tail boom with the serial number visible, pieces of camera equipment floating in an oil slick. They searched for 3 days, covering hundreds of square miles of ocean. They found no body, no parachute, no life raft. Lieutenant James Doolittle Jr. had vanished. His family received the telegram 2 weeks later. Missing in action, presumed dead. His mother kept his room exactly as he'd left it. His father never spoke his name again, the pain too deep for words. His fiancée, a nurse named Margaret Hayes, wore black for a year and never married. Every 4 minutes of searching, another question burned. Was this bravery or madness? The photographs Jimmy died protecting never made it back. The cameras, if they survived the impact, sank to the bottom of the Philippine Sea. The intelligence he'd gathered, the precise locations of those 57 Japanese aircraft, was lost. Or so everyone believed. The war ground on. American forces liberated the Philippines in a campaign that cost thousands of lives. The Japanese airfields on Mindanao were eventually captured, though not before those aircraft inflicted terrible casualties on American landing forces. Jimmy's sacrifice seemed tragically wasted, a brave man who gave everything for intelligence that never reached the people who needed it. The war ground on. American forces liberated the Philippines in a campaign that cost thousands of lives. The Japanese airfields on Mindanao were eventually captured, though not before those aircraft inflicted terrible casualties on American landing forces. Jimmy's sacrifice seemed tragically wasted, a brave man who gave everything for intelligence that never reached the people who needed it. The war ground on. American forces liberated the Philippines in a campaign that cost thousands of lives. The Japanese airfields on Mindanao were eventually captured, though not before those aircraft inflicted terrible casualties on American landing forces. Jimmy's sacrifice seemed tragically wasted, a brave man who gave everything for intelligence that never reached the people who needed it. For 80 years, that's where the story ended, a name on a memorial wall, a file marked missing, presumed dead, in the National Archives. Another young American who flew into the sky one morning and never came home. But in 2024, a team of maritime archaeologists working with the University of Hawaii made an extraordinary discovery. They were surveying the Philippine Sea, using advanced sonar to map World War II wrecks when they found something unusual on the seafloor, 500 feet below the surface. The sonar image showed the distinctive twin boom shape of a P-38 Lightning, remarkably intact despite 8 decades underwater. The dive team went down in October 2024. What they found changed everything. The P-38 sat upright on the bottom, partially buried in silt but structurally complete. The cockpit was open. Jimmy had managed to escape before the plane sank. But here's what made the discovery extraordinary. Strapped to the pilot seat, protected by a waterproof canvas bag that had somehow remained sealed for 80 years, were Jimmy's reconnaissance photographs. Could anyone else have pulled this off? The dive team carefully recovered the bag, brought it to the surface, and handed it to military historians who specialized in World War II intelligence materials. What they found inside that bag told a story of courage that defied imagination. Jimmy hadn't just photographed the Japanese airfield. In the minutes after his plane was hit, as he fought to keep the aircraft flying, he'd written detailed notes on the back of each photograph. Wind direction, cloud cover, anti-aircraft gun positions, estimated aircraft types. The notes were written in pencil, in handwriting that grew shakier as the plane lost altitude, but every word was legible. More remarkably, Jimmy had prioritized the photographs. He'd sorted them, numbered them, and written a cover note explaining which images were most critical for mission planning. Even as his plane was dying around him, even knowing he might have only minutes to live, Jimmy had completed his mission with meticulous professionalism. The last note he wrote was dated and timed. 11:45 hours, November 18, 1944. Engine failure imminent. Ditching approximately 5 miles off Leyte coast. All target photography complete. Request photos be delivered to 5th Air Force Intelligence immediately. Lt. J. Doolittle Jr. But here's the detail that brought tears to the eyes of hardened military historians. Jimmy hadn't sealed the bag and left it strapped to the seat immediately. The evidence suggested he'd escaped the plane initially, made it to the surface, then dove back down to the sinking aircraft to secure the photographs. In water that cold, with the plane sinking fast, with every second underwater potentially his last, Jimmy had gone back for the mission. He never surfaced again. The P-38 wreckage showed why. A section of debris, probably from the tail section that had sheared off on impact, had shifted as the plane sank, trapping Jimmy as he worked to secure the intelligence materials. His remains were found still inside the fuselage, hands on the canvas bag, making sure it was properly secured to the seat where it might someday be found. The photographs themselves, once carefully preserved and digitized, proved to be some of the finest reconnaissance imagery produced during the entire Pacific War. Military analysts in 2024, comparing Jimmy's photos to subsequent intelligence about that Mindanao airfield, confirmed that his count of 57 aircraft had been perfectly accurate. His notes about anti-aircraft positions were so precise they matched Japanese defense maps captured later in the war. If American intelligence had received these photographs in 1944, historians now believe, the bombing strikes on that airfield could have been executed with far greater precision, potentially saving dozens of American aircraft and hundreds of lives in subsequent operations. These stories remind us why courage matters, and why freedom was never free. Jimmy Doolittle Jr. was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross in 2025, 80 years after his death. His family, a niece in her 70s who'd never met the uncle she'd heard about all her life, accepted the medal at a ceremony in Pearl Harbor. The citation praised extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty in the face of certain death, embodying the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. The photographs Jimmy died protecting are now displayed at the National Museum of the Pacific War in Texas. Visitors can see not just the images, but Jimmy's handwritten notes, preserved exactly as he wrote them in those final desperate minutes. School children stand before those displays and ask the question that matters most. Would I have that kind of courage? The P-38 Lightning that carried Jimmy on his final mission has been raised from the seafloor. After 8 decades underwater, corroded and encrusted with marine growth, it's being painstakingly restored at the Smithsonian's preservation facility. When the restoration is complete, the aircraft will be displayed at the National Air and Space Museum, positioned as if in flight, forever frozen in the moment before it touched the water. Was this bravery or madness? The question assumes they're different things. Jimmy Doolittle Jr. understood what too many people forget. Sometimes the mission matters more than the man. Sometimes the intelligence that saves 1,000 lives tomorrow is worth 1 life today. Sometimes courage means diving back into the darkness knowing you won't come out because the job isn't finished. The American servicemen and women who fought in World War II understood this arithmetic of sacrifice in ways we can barely comprehend today. They climbed into aircraft that might not bring them home, stormed beaches knowing many wouldn't see the next sunrise, flew missions into enemy territory with fuel tanks running on fumes and prayers. They did this not because they wanted to die, but because they understood what they were fighting for. Jimmy's story reminds us that heroism isn't always about the dramatic moment, the split-second decision under fire, the desperate last stand. Sometimes heroism is quieter, the choice to complete the mission, to do the job right, to make sure the intelligence gets home, even if you don't. It's the photographer who keeps shooting even as his plane is dying. It's the pilot who goes back for the photographs instead of saving himself. It's the sailor who secures the canvas bag with shaking hands in freezing water because someone someday needs to know what he saw. For 80 years, Jimmy Doolittle Jr. was just another name on the wall of the missing, another young American who vanished into the vast Pacific, another family left with questions that had no answers. But he wasn't missing. He was exactly where he chose to be, securing the intelligence, completing the mission, doing his duty right up until the cold water and the dark took him. The ocean kept his secret for 8 decades, but the ocean couldn't keep it forever. Truth has a way of surfacing, even from 500 feet down, even after 80 years. Jimmy's story found its way home at last, carried not by the wind or the waves, but by people who believed that every veteran, every sacrifice, every mission matters enough to remember. When you see that P-38 Lightning in the museum, when you read Jimmy's handwritten notes on those photographs, when you hear his story, remember this: freedom was never free. Every liberty we enjoy, every peaceful morning we wake up to, every flag that flies over American soil was purchased with the courage of people like Jimmy Doolittle Jr., ordinary Americans who did extraordinary things because the mission mattered, because their brothers in arms mattered, because freedom mattered more than fear. Subscribe now and join us again for more untold tales of World War II, because these stories remind us why courage matters and why we must never forget the price that was paid.